Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast, where we explore cutting-edge strategies to keep teams human-centered, drive innovation, and empower you with the tools and insights needed to help your team excel and thrive in today's rapidly changing world. Your host is Dane Groeneveld, a seasoned expert with over 20 years of experience in enhancing teamwork and innovation. Today, Dane is joined by Rachel Burr. Rachel is an executive coach, leadership consultant, and people expert with a unique blend of insight, action, and humor. She works with leaders to honestly examine what they bring to their role, including strengths, weaknesses, values, and everything in between. In this episode, Rachel challenges the myth of transformation, highlighting why real change is rarely smooth and why some leaders unintentionally stifle their team's creativity. She explores how common leadership behaviors, like reinforcing the wrong habits or controlling too much, can quietly shut down innovation, even when leaders think they are encouraging it. Dane shares the pluses and deltas exercise as a tool for structured team feedback, and Rachel emphasizes the importance of a coaching mindset, one that extends beyond formal coaching sessions and becomes part of how teams learn, adapt, and grow together. If you've ever wondered whether business is getting in the way of real progress or how to create an environment where people can experiment and grow, this conversation will give you plenty to think about. So, teamwork makes the dream work, and we're here to inspire your next collaborative breakthrough. Gather your team or put on your headphones, and let's dive in together.
Welcome to the Future of Teamwork podcast. My name is Dane Groeneveld, CEO of the Huddle 3 Group, and today I'm joined by Rachel Burr. Rachel is the CEO and an executive coach with Catamentum. She's also the author of Butterfly Goo, which is the down and dirty truth of transformation. So it's going to be a fun conversation, particularly diving into the title and what is behind all of those elements of transformation. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you, Dane. Thank you for having me.
You bet. So tell us a bit more about you. How did you come to be doing all this cool work?
Oh, how did I? Talk about a circuitous route. I started out in psychology, thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. Figured out I really wasn't very good at research, didn't like it, didn't want to teach. Other people didn't want me teaching. But I took the fundamentals that I loved. I loved working with people. I loved being able to connect with them, listen to them, hear what they said, hear what they don't say, but mean. And essentially over time, really built that into what I do now. So I work with leaders. I help them really tap into the core of who they are and bring that out in the best way to serve them and their teams in different situations, different experiences, different, organizations or times in their career. So kind of moved in and figured it out along the way. And I like we were talking before the call, but the idea of taking building blocks and figuring out who you are at that core, then you can build new things with it, but in a very authentic way.
Oh, I love that. And you'd had a background along the way in learning and development as well. Was that across whole organizations or more in leadership development?
That started out, that was kind of my first, after I left graduate school and did some forays, it was one of those figuring out, well, okay, here are my building blocks. What can I do? So research, which even though, I didn't maybe like it, I could do it. And human behavior, how people work, how they think. So I actually ended up in strategic marketing for a little bit. So really kind of blending that understanding, loved doing focus groups and interviews. And even though I may not like the research part, I love taking information and putting it together so it makes sense and that other people can learn from it, make decisions based on it, that kind of thing. And from there, was working for a very large home builder, so had the opportunity to design learning experiences around strategic marketing. And that led into doing leadership development and getting to work with the sales team. And one of the things I loved with that was I created their first nationwide sales training program for new hires.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I'd never sold anything. And that sounds bad, but it's not, because again, tapping into the core, essentially what I did was I just spent time with the salespeople.
Yeah.
I watched what they did. I watched kind of the why, the how, and essentially I was a translator for them. And the way it turned out also, because sometimes when you are an expert at something, you do it without thinking.
Yes.
And because of that, as an expert, a lot of times you don't remember what it was like to be in a beginner's mind. And so translating that back and being able to explain it to someone else, often not their strength. So, but that is my strength. So
Yeah.
being able to take what they do well and break it down into digestible pieces so that someone else can learn it.
That's awesome. So it's almost like marketing into instructional design and yeah.
Yeah, it's all connected. And then, kind of taking that from the foundation of learning in general to helping leaders learn.
Yeah.
And looking at the impact that can have, because so much of what they do reverberates through the entire organization. So it's a huge lever for change.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. I've one of my old bosses, who's actually here visiting me in California right now. He always told me I started my career out as a recruiter, and he was just like, marketing is 40% of the job. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm recruiting talent. And he's like, no, it's marketing. You got to like learn, what people are looking for and what the features and benefits are and how it all connects. And I was fascinated by that early on.
I love that.
It's a great sort of point of curiosity and learning and growth. Yeah. And then when you talk about building new, obviously that ties into the book title and this whole journey of the caterpillar to the butterfly. What I'm fascinated about before we jump into that is that we're living in this age. I think one of your articles recently, Thriving in the Future of Work with Resilience and Purpose, it was talking to the fact that, the companies that are going to win are going to be the ones that build this culture of learning so they can continue to reconstitute their parts into sort of better recipes, better formulations.
Absolutely.
So sorry, go.
No, I just get so excited.
Oh, me too. I'm pumped. I'm excited. So I'm intrigued. Like, where did you start with the book? Like, in what context were you captivated to go down that path and write?
So it is so funny. It's almost living the experience as, living the experience and then writing about it. And then the writing itself was also a transformational experience. Uh-huh. So it feels very meta in some levels. So I think I always wanted to write a book from when I was really young. And the story never came to me. I never could figure out what I wanted to write about. And every time I'd sit down, it felt like a chore. And I remember years ago, even when I was in graduate school, I had this idea and I got kind of far on it and it fizzled. And then as I advanced in my career, I thought, well, I should write, a business book. I should write a coaching book. I should. Ugh, little red flags all over the place. So I really started to invest in, okay, how do I figure this out? I took workshops, I listened to podcasts, I read books, I hired a coach, I hired another coach.
Yeah.
And I talk about it in the book as these little clicks that you hear, like a combination lock that come to that. And when I realized that I didn't have to write a business book, not that there's anything wrong with that for people who are called to do that, and I could write in my voice, my humor, told in my way, because people will say, well, if I wrote, it's already been said. What could I possibly write? And it's like, yes, but it hasn't been said by you from your perspective and your voice. And when I realized that was kind of this final click and the lock sprung open, and I sat down and I didn't stop writing for 9 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a transformation.
It was, yeah. And so it's a story, that is a transformation, and the story is about transformation from the time I left graduate school until I got here to California.
Very cool. Very cool. And before the show, you were telling me a little bit more about the butterfly as the ideal when it comes to transformation, and the fact that, the beauty of that was the distraction. So perhaps you could sort of expand upon that and what comes before and during.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's funny. I was saying that I love the butterfly as this ideal transformation metaphor. I love metaphors in general. I think it's a great way to connect with each other. But the beauty of it, and even the softness of it, right? So even with the title, I think when you see the cover of the book, it helps kind of, dispel the myth of soft when it comes to butterflies.
Yeah.
Because so we have this ideal of what transformation is. And I say ideal, not even idea. And it's a myth. And it's a well curated myth on social media and other places. And somebody is probably benefiting from that. But the problem is that beauty distracts us from the truly arduous nature and the work that goes into transformation. It's not magic. It doesn't just show up. There's no fairy godmother, at least not outside of Disney. Um, and so really, if we go back and think about the transformation process, and this is why the butterfly is such a great analogy. You have the caterpillar, it's eating, it's living its life, and it's essentially preparing itself for transformation. And the time comes and it starts to spin its cocoon. It starts to weave the tapestry, the fabric of what is going to help it become what it wants to be.
Yeah.
And it ends up encasing itself in this cocoon. And essentially it dissolves. It dissolves into this gelatinous green goo. And the thing I love about that is that the caterpillar took everything it needed, everything that was butterfly, it took it into the cocoon with it.
Yeah.
And when it dissolves, it's dissolving into its core parts. At its core, these are the building blocks. It used to be a caterpillar, and now it's taking those same blocks and it's building a butterfly.
Yeah.
And I don't even know what that must be like to, truly dissolve into goo. I know what it felt like to feel like I was slogging through goo to get
Yes.
there. But people also make the mistake of thinking when the butterfly emerges from the cocoon, the chrysalis, it's like that's transformation. It's not. That's the result of transformation. And that is the myth. Because if we truly, I love this, if we truly appreciated the goo that a caterpillar had to go through, we wouldn't expect to be born butterflies.
Yes. Yeah, it's a total shock and surprise to come out the other end with that.
It is, yes. Yeah.
No, that's neat. I was talking to a friend the other day, Maggie Jackson, who's the author of Uncertain, and she was saying in this world is fast-moving, complex, that we've now introduced 10 enterprise-level change efforts per annum versus what was 2 back in 2016. So wow. I feel like as the world's got faster, a lot of us have become a little bit too enamored with transformation. Maybe we're trying to transform too much, too often, in too many places.
Yes. And to your point, I think we get enamored by what we see as the potential outcome.
Yeah.
Right. So, and because we're doing it faster and faster, we clearly do not understand what it takes to invest in real change. And you and I were talking too about the emotion behind it and all of that. And it is such a huge factor in fear when it comes to change.
Yeah.
And if we don't pay attention to that, it's not that we should be controlled by it. It's not even necessarily that we should make decisions completely on it. But when it shows up, we need to have a conversation about it.
Yes.
Either with other people or with ourselves.
Yeah, that's really very relevant because we talk about the anxious generation, right? But this generation that's come into the workforce in the last 10 to 15 years is facing a major shift. I think your article there was suggesting 100 million jobs by 2030. I think the World Economic Forum was placing it at 1 billion jobs changed. I think that was 30% of all hours or maybe more. I mean, there's a lot of change coming. So if we're not talking to people about what opportunities, what promise may exist in the future, we may be getting a little bit too myopic and too stuck in our current thinking.
Absolutely. And stuck, goo, like it.
Goo.
Well, and we have to be able to be lifelong learners. We have to be able to learn to pivot, and not just pivot for pivot's sake, but to be able to do it in a way that is informed and mindful.
Yeah.
And one or the other, just going back to my analogy, I love the idea that a caterpillar gets one butterfly, but we get to go through as many journeys as we either want or as, our lifespan allows. That there is, and I like to say, in every butterfly, there is another hungry caterpillar. So understanding that we are capable of ongoing transformation because we are ongoing, we're learning, we're growing, all of that. And that is a very purposeful kind of thing that we get to choose to do, because a lot of
Yeah.
people choose not to. They choose to stay in the safety zone. Or, for example, a company will say, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to, be big. We're going to push. But then when the risk shows up, whether
Yeah.
for individuals or for the company as a whole, and that's just groups of people,
Yep.
then they pull back. It's like, oh, wait, I thought this was going to be, the beautiful transformation, the myth. And it's like, yeah, there's risk. There's risk. There's pain. There's
Yeah.
hard. This is hard. So it's very important.
And it helps set people's expectations for what's ahead. I mean, a lot of businesses have gone through huge change, whether it's just in their current context or through consolidation, mergers, acquisitions, you name it, new technologies coming out. So I think creating that mindset that it is going to be hard, that we're all going to fight through it, and there's going to be shared learning and recognition along the way is it's important for leaders to be making the time and space for that conversation.
It is. And I think the challenge becomes, do we as people truly recognize that? And do we appreciate or even know how to do it?
Yeah, yeah. We did, intrigued on your views on this, we did start rolling out a program a few years ago. Guest of the show, Dr. Ernesto Ciroli, had this boundary riders concept where he encouraged teams to be looking at the edges of their organization for new ideas, whether it's on product or internal business process. But just to almost give everyone license to exercise their entrepreneurial muscle in the organization. And that was kind of in service of embracing change and possible transformation opportunities.
Yeah.
And it landed well in some quadrants and less well in others, probably due to that fear factor and the level of conversation, the level of time we were making for it. But how do you see, particularly having had the learning and development background, how do you see the emergence of these transformation ideas happening in businesses and in teams, in this current state?
I love that. And I love the idea of kind of exploring the fringe. And I think, you and I were talking that the human brain is very old, existing in an environment that is rapidly changing beyond anything our brain was originally constructed to do.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of that is amazing. And leaders have to create the environment for that to really thrive. And I think about leaders I've worked with, and they'll say, well, I want folks to own their business. I want them to act like entrepreneurs. And
Yeah.
I can't understand why they're not doing it. And I'm thinking, oh, I have a guess. Because what usually happens is we reinforce certain behaviors. We discourage other behaviors. The question is that in line with what you're actually looking to achieve? The behaviors you're reinforcing and discouraging, is that in line with helping people have a truly entrepreneurial spirit? Or are you inadvertently really conditioning them to be back just as part of a fold, to be looking to you for answers? And it's very difficult sometimes for leaders, especially if people around them are not willing to tell them the truth. And here's the deal. That happens all the time.
Correct.
We like to think like our society is all flat, and it's not.
No.
There are these power differentials. So I think that's the beauty. How do you take a truly incredible idea, something that will spark and drive innovation, and facilitate it? Don't squash it inadvertently because you're saying risk and fear and control and all these factors that are absolutely part of human beings. How do you be aware of that and help to set up structure and ways of doing things that won't create the barriers?
Yeah, it's tricky. And we've seen organizations create transformation teams or innovation departments, and it's never where you think it's going to come from.
Well, and the idea sometimes is, even with these ideas, there is kind of this, sometimes an elitist mentality.
Yeah.
Does somebody really go and ask the person who's cleaning the coffee maker, well, what do you think?
Yeah.
Or do they ask someone who's, in HR about a product idea?
Yeah.
It's like, Or are they going back to the exact same well over and over and expecting different water?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I think authority is an interesting topic in that mix too, because sometimes you've just got to kind of let go of something and say, hey, this team over here, you've got a budget and a time frame, and you can go and you have the authority to go and do what you're going to do. Like, you're not going to be accountable for those results. It's more like a playful experiment, because otherwise, if you're just asking people to come up with ideas and they're not given the authority, there's not really the excitement or the impetus to go and try it.
Or if you love it, you have like a spotlight on somebody and it feels almost like an interrogation. It's like, okay, give me your top 3 best ideas now.
Yeah.
Like, but quick, give it to me. And it's like, that is not how creativity and innovation work.
It goes back to your point on focus groups earlier. Like, if you can get curious and make that kind of sense-making journey a team sport, then you're likely to come up with some better ideas and have a few more people incorporated into the actual planning before you start executing anything.
Absolutely. I love that. And the other thing too, I was working with a leader right now with his team, and he's really trying to shift the way they operate. And there are pieces too, even within the people in the organization. We talk a lot about diversity and what that looks like, and the diversity of thought and the way we show up, even within the power of a team, right?
Yeah.
And the easiest example that I can give is you have folks who are naturally more extroverted, which means they're, thinking as they talk. I am guilty of that all the time, but it's part of how I process. And then you have folks who are introverted. And of course, just to make sure we're all using the word the same, it doesn't mean they're shy. It just means they want time to contemplate something before it comes out of their mouth. And I had an example of a leader who had hired me to coach, his executive leader, so very high up in the organization. The kind of I would say the sponsor or the manager of this other leader, very much an extrovert, talks loud, talks fast, etc. And this gentleman he's an introvert. And so he would take time to think about what the other person would say. And the extrovert clearly had no tolerance for like silence or space or anything. And he would just jump in and fill it and then he would say, I don't understand why you're not giving me ideas. It's like,
That's a tricky one.
It is. So also how you go about, I always say with structure, if you take metal bars and like cement, for example, when I was a kid, we used to love to play on the jungle gym, right? You take metal bars and cement and you create this structure in a way that there's a foundation and there's a security in terms of like how to work through it, but there's space to play.
Yeah.
And so that space that you create, because you can take those same bars and you can take that same cement and you can build a jail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And how you can live in that space versus how you live in a jungle gym and what you get out of it, that's very different. So how are you creating space and how are you creating engagement in a way that will actually get you what you want?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy too. And it is hard to create that space today in an era where there's so many tasks at work. Everyone's just churning tasks out. No one really takes time away from the task to think about what could happen differently in this department. I mean, people are busy doing work.
Yeah, and we confuse busy with productive or successful or effective, right?
Yeah.
It's so tangible to be able to clean out my inbox and feel a sense. It's kind of like when I used to have to mow the lawn when I was a kid. You look back and you can see, the parts that you've mowed.
Oh, it's wonderful.
It feels good, right?
Smells good.
It does. It smells really good. And the problem is when you have these, information, companies, service companies, you have leaders that are in roles that are not hands-on. They have to deal with the gray and the ambiguity.
Yeah.
It's hard to get away because you don't have that clear sense of accomplishment because there's this thing that you can point to. And so I feel sometimes we revert back to that thing, that busyness, because it makes us feel productive. It makes us feel like we're accomplishing something. But the problem is busyness does not automatically achieve the goal. And in fact, sometimes it actually erodes our ability to achieve anything.
Oh, absolutely. I think that concept, particularly in the the generations that have been in the workforce a little longer, that if I'm seen to be busy, then I'm safe. My job's safe. People will think that I'm a good stand-up team member.
Yep.
We really need to fundamentally change that mindset in all of our teams right now.
Yeah, we do. It's, when we were all like when the Industrial Revolution happened and some of us came off, farms, and I grew up in the Midwest, and you worked at an assembly line, and it was very clear that you have to be there. And, it was more of a task system. The world is vastly different. And yet, to your point, we have not changed the way we evaluate ourselves, way we evaluate the work. And it's going to cause more and more problems as the world gets increasingly more complex.
Oh, absolutely. And the former guest, Luke Williams, came on. He wrote the book Disrupt, and he talked a lot about making disruption accessible and available to all team members. And his analogy was like, it's like cooking. Like anyone can cook. It's just certain people have, a better kitchen or more confidence because they've got a cookbook. But if anyone was told, hey, you have to make a meal right now and here's some food, you can do it. So it's just like, hey, we can all disrupt, we can all transform. But how are we going to go and look at those, going back to your constituent parts, your building blocks, look at the ingredients that we've got and think about, is there a better way for us to organize these so we're not all running around being busy creating fires that we need to put out? You see, there's always a few arsonists in every organization that like to create a fire to make themselves feel important when they go and put it out. Like there's a lot to do there.
And it's fun. I shouldn't say this, and I'm very careful being in California about the fun.
Yeah.
Fun being a firefighter. I honor true firefighters. I honor a lot. And it's not that we don't have to put out fires at work too, but some people get a little too excited about being firefighters rather than being folks who actually create an environment where fires are less likely.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very true. It's very true. So are there any, in the book or in your experience, are there any sort of tips, tricks, methods that you like to deploy to really get in and embrace that goo?
That goo.
Yeah. I got there.
I think, and I work a lot with leaders in this, I go back to this, and I'm sure if anybody's heard me speak, they maybe are tired of me saying this, but at our core, understanding who we are fundamentally, it grounds us.
Yes.
And in the mess of all this reaction, sometimes we not only don't take time to really spend time with our core, we don't even take time to figure out what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I encourage leaders to, okay, who are you? What are your values? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And that's not a bad word.
Yeah. Yeah.
People think that's it. Oh, we don't say weaknesses, we say opportunities. And it's like, yeah, there are opportunities to either overcome or mitigate your weakness, and you have to figure out which way to go. But understanding who we are and kind of going back to the butterfly again, not trying to make ourselves into something we're not, but understanding how do we bring the best of who we are to whatever the situation is calling for. So I'm not completely changing myself when I go from leading here to leading here or leading in this situation. I may bring myself differently to that because different things will be required. And if we have a solid foundation, if we have that core, then when we're in the winds of change, or whatever analogy I'm using now, we will feel more solid, because spending a lot of time kind of looking out and trying to react and respond is a great way to be thrown off balance.
Yes.
But if we can ground ourselves, it doesn't mean there's not going to still be the storms. It doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. It's not. But if we don't know who we are and we don't believe in that and believe in something, then there is no hope for us to stay stable in chaos.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And everyone's in their own version of chaos right now. So when you're working with a leader to kind of get grounded, know where those values, strengths, weaknesses are, is that a one-on-one exercise, or are you starting to go out more broadly into the organization and seek other data points?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would say, I think, first of all, individually, it's important, especially as the leader and the team, to really understand. And for me anyway, that's a very vulnerable exercise. So it's not something you can do in a town hall meeting. It's something you do need to spend time with, either one-on-one or, in small groups. I love Lencioni's book around, the book is called The Five Dysfunctions, but
Yes.
he shifted it later to, the five behaviors of a cohesive, team.
Yeah.
And just as a slight tangent, people think, oh, that's just a rebranding. And it's not. The book looks at the dysfunctions, but you can't aspire to a lack of dysfunction.
No, you can't. It's hard to emulate.
What is that? It's like, it's like, well, just be not dysfunctional and then we'll be great. It's like, no, we're not doing that. So I would say you have to start small. You have to start, well, first of all, you start with yourself. Because by the way, you're the only one you can change anyway.
Correct.
And then how do you work that into, say, your first team? How do you work that into the people around you? And think about it as, it's not even an archer's target, because that makes the kind of the sequential, kind of it makes the circles feel sequential and it makes them feel isolated. But it's more of like, how do you do this in a way that there's this exponential impact and really good stuff starts to leak into the organization?
Yeah.
So, I recommend starting small with things that are vulnerable and personal and hard, and then working your way out in a way that's purposeful, and there might even be innovation around it. So not getting, too, holding it too tightly, what that's going to look like or how it will spread. But I start small and move out. I think that's more powerful.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And it's also, the leader has to go first, right? If they're going to do vulnerable work before they maybe go and ask some of their reports or team members to do vulnerable work, they need to know what that feels like.
Absolutely. I had one client where it turned out okay, but we were going to do a team session with his leaders. Yeah, high-level leaders. And he said, okay, well, we were talking about a date, and we said, okay, we're going to do it this week. He's like, great, I'll be in Europe that week. And like, no, you're part of the team.
In the room.
Pretty important part of the team. You need to be here. If you're gone, we're not doing this. Because how is that? And I love the idea too. And it's, you go away, everybody has this great experience. They have this cohesive kind of trust building experience. And then the leader who wasn't there comes back and just basically demolishes everything. It's one of those where, even with engagement in organizations, if you ask for feedback, if you ask for change, and then you do nothing with it, it would have been better just never to ask at all.
Yeah,
because
true.
it's more demoralizing to have something ripped apart that you built than to never build it at all.
Yeah, I've seen that in so many organizations the last few years. I think COVID and the pandemic, sadly, it was an opportunity for us to create a lot more in our teams, but then we kind of overdid it, and then we tore some stuff down, and there's definitely some PTSD from all of that.
Yes. I'm not sure we'll recover from that anytime soon.
No, we've got a ways to go. As you get into teams, there's an exercise I've used with teams before. I call it the plus delta exercise. One of my coaches, Anna Carroll, shared it with me. And essentially you go in and it's like a speed dating round. You get like 6 or 7 leaders around the table. And this has to be an intact team, like, a leadership team, for example. And you say, okay, what's our objective up here? Okay, our objective is to open in this new market next year and hit 2 million in sales. And you go, okay, in honor of that objective, what does Dane do really well and where are his weaknesses? So that's the plus and the delta. And then you'll do the same. How about Rachel? Pluses and deltas. You go through it all, like 5-6 minutes per leader. Now, the leader's not allowed to respond. So if you say, Dane's full of ideas, but he won't follow through on execution, I've just got to nod and be quiet. And you get all of these pluses and deltas on the board, and everyone in the team's had their turn. There's a facilitator making sure people have a voice, and you get it there. And then you say, okay, what 1 or 2 things can Dane do and can Rachel do that's going to aid our team to go towards that objective? So it's very vulnerable, but it's fascinating thinking about those strengths and weaknesses.
I love that idea.
And any sort of instinctive sort of responses if you're working with a leader who maybe hasn't done that work for themselves before? Do you sense that you could be at risk going into the full throttle environment?
You mean in terms of the full team going in?
Yeah, just having the team calling each other out.
I do think it's important to take the temperature of the team and understand the level of trust that's there first. Because if you try to dive in, it's kind of like going in with some great scuba gear, but you didn't realize there were alligators in the moat.
Yes.
So And kind of going back to your point about not wanting to take a very good idea and actually, kind of destroy something that could have been very powerful.
Yeah.
So part of it is, if the team's already got that level of trust, then yes. And if you explain to them kind of what's going on, why you want to do it, and even what you can do is you can do some conversations up front, say one-on-one or small, or even as a team come together and say, okay, what do you want to get out of this exercise? So people feel like they have agency, they have ownership over it. The other thing you can do as well, I've done this, maybe not, for this specific exercise, but you have ideas and you come together as that group, and then maybe you break out into pairs and you come back and it's that whole, kind of accordion look.
Yeah.
And people, they're kind of like, well, why do you need to do that? Going back to old brains, it is socially very challenging, very difficult, very scary to say things in front of a group, and you're afraid you're going to look stupid. You're afraid, all the judgment that we have, even at executive levels. Because when I work with executives, I have ceased to be amazed at the number of folks that have imposter syndrome at that level. And to some extent, if you're pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, you are going to feel that a little bit. So good. So, but kind of doing the small group, the social threat goes down. People feel more comfortable opening up. And then when you come back to a group to speak on behalf of a small group, you already feel like you have the backing of this group. So you don't feel like it's just you. You're not just isolated. So kind of thinking about the structure of how you do something based on the result you want, and then recognizing the human tendencies and how do you support what's going to help strengthen it, and how do you mitigate, and how do you just be very clear with people about what's happening and why, so that they can show up and be a part of it.
Oh, I like that a lot. Do you find with leaders that you're working with, when you've done this discovery of understanding who they are, that you help them to go and share more of it with their teams?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite clients, and I use him as an example a few times. I never know if he actually hears me use him as an example. We won't use his name. I think he knows who it is. So he hired me, or actually technically the HR VP hired me. So coming in, and honestly, those are some of my favorite clients. I love working with leaders who are, high potential, and they, or people who need a thought partner. Love all of it. And you've got leaders who really don't think they need coaching. One, they don't really understand it, but it is. And they are some of my favorite people, because what happens is you give them this safe space. And when I say safe, I do not mean soft. This is not a bouncy castle.
Yes.
And I like to think, at least my style is direct and supportive. Not harsh, but direct and supportive. I'm not filtering where other people, are not telling them things. And letting them just kind of bounce around in it. They can be frustrated and they can disagree with me. And I'll tell them, look, if you disagree, great. Then put it on the table. If you keep it in your head, I can't help you. So, but as we work on that, as they start to go experiment, we might even record, kind of meetings they're in or something to watch how they're engaging and the impact they're having. And watching folks like that be able to step into, who is the leader I really want to be? What's the impact I want to have? And what's the gap right now between my intention and other people's experience? And have them go out and start to experiment and play around and shift. And this particular leader, I had people from his leadership team come up to me at an offsite and say, hey, you're going to keep coaching him, right? Because if you're not, we'll pay you to keep coaching him.
That's a great endorsement.
Yeah. One of his leaders, totally facetiously, kind of tried to slip me $100, as a tip.
That's funny.
To kind of say, hey, thank you for making my life easier.
It's real.
Yeah. And I think that's the impact. And the other piece that's important too is when I'm working with a leader and I have been brought in by, say, their manager or someone else as a sponsor, usually their manager, that having the coaching obviously is confidential, but having touch points to help create engagement and conversation, because there are some times where we're working really hard to change. We see a lot of what we're doing different, but because we tend to continue to see people through the filter, the lens that we've always seen them, we may need help to shift that perspective. We need help to see them differently. And so I always say it takes a leader, or it takes a village to raise a leader.
Yeah.
So
I like
sometimes you coach the leader and sometimes you coach the village.
Yeah. I really like that takes a village to raise a leader concept because particularly as the world changes, like you could be a perfectly competent, steady leader right now, today.
Yeah.
And then in 6 months' time, something's changed. There's a big customer shift, economics, something at home. And at that point in time, it's like, it's going to be really painful to have to change that leader out for the organization. So it's far better that as a team, we take responsibility for helping find out, manage upwards, what's going on, how could we be of more help, what are you worried about? And I think there's a huge opportunity there for teams that embrace that sort of call to action.
I agree. And I think kind of along with that, I think that's also the shift in what leadership is. There's this kind of the myth of, the leader as this ideal on a pedestal,
All knowing.
all knowing, omnipotent, omniscient, and that also, we work with so many myths in this world. And not only does it negatively impacts the team in thinking that they can't actually be part of creating that innovation and the ownership, but it's a lot of pressure on the leader to think they do have to be perfect, that they do always have to have the right answers. And especially to your point, the organization's going to shift, maybe 6 months, maybe tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to help people shift, not just as, but folks on individual contributor level or manager level, but leaders need that help too. And they have to be open to it. That's true. And that's vulnerability and trust. But a lot of the articles that I read are like, leaders need to do this and leaders need to do that. And leaders need to do this with their people. And it's like, yeah. And the last time I looked, leaders are people too.
Yeah.
And we forget the help that everybody needs because we tend to kind of relate to the folks that are, being, and I'm air quoting for folks who can't see it, being oppressed.
Yeah.
Sometimes leaders are doing the best they can, but they don't know how to change. They don't know what to do. And it's trite because it's true to say that leadership is lonely. And a lot of it's lonely because they don't give themselves permission to be kind of like to change and shift without knowing exactly what they're going to do. And we don't do a good job of tolerating imperfection in our leaders. We love to knock people off pedestals.
Yeah, we do. It's even worse in Australia where we've got tall poppy syndrome and we just like to chop everyone off at the knees, bring everyone down to our level. But that's a phenomenon. I think that's where teams that sort of have a match-winning philosophy where they're all in it for the same objective, shared fate, tend to do better going through those changes and transformations.
Yeah, and it's got to be more than just lip service.
Yeah,
it's got to be like, oh, we're all in it. It's got to live.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. So we've covered some really cool stuff from sort of like what the myths are and how many of them exist in the world and kind of diving into, the sludging through the hard stuff, but actually that being wonderfully, it's a wonderful opportunity for people to appreciate each other, to achieve new things, to participate in the building rather than just kind of get landed with something that they don't understand. And
it always, when you say it that way too, it reminds me of the idea of like kind of a human chain across my grandfather had a fishing cabin next to this this river that was really muddy and silty and sludgy and everything. And you think about any one person trying to cross, well, that river was different, but let's just call it a stream or something. Yeah. And when you can hold on to each other rather than one person trying to cross and get swept down the river, when you have those people to actually hold on to and to move you across, you literally can help pull people with you and help them come out the other side. And we cannot underestimate how much we really need each other more and more in these environments.
And I think that's in our teams at work and in our teams in the community too.
Oh, absolutely.
It's really necessary.
Absolutely.
Final question there for you, Rachel. To that point, to this kind of, it takes a village to raise a leader, coaching as a capability or a mindset in organizations.
Yeah.
What's your view for the future of teamwork in terms of will more organization have coaches deployed for more roles than just the executives? Like, how's that playing out?
I think that would be great. I think understanding, first of all, what coaching is that I'll get people will say, oh, you need to fix them. They're not a car.
No.
And
No.
I don't fix people.
Yeah.
So what is coaching? What's the intent of it? And then how do you help leaders and managers and other folks, even individuals, how do you help them take on the skill of coaching?
Yeah.
Because, you have one person that's maybe a coach coming in and out. You have like a team that can really coach each other.
Yeah.
And honestly, my ideal is that everybody gets to the point where they can coach each other, managers, everybody. I get worked out of a job and I get to go be a dive instructor somewhere in the Caribbean.
I like that. That sounds
Yep.
cool.
So I think I'm good with working myself out of a job. If the world can really embrace not coaching as a thing, but coaching as a mindset, as how we engage with each other as human beings and understanding the struggles and also understanding how people learn and grow and supporting that, together, then that would be truly innovative for teams.
Yeah, it would be. I think that's a wonderful hope for the future of teamwork.
Yeah, and for my scuba diving career. So.
And yeah, in the Caribbean. I like it. I like it. Well, we'll all have a lot more time to be doing what we want to be doing if we're operating like that.
Yeah, wouldn't that be great?
It would be cool. And AI can do the 30% of our hours that we no longer
absolutely.
want. No, this has been a wonderful conversation, Rachel. If anyone wants to find you as a coach or the book, where do they best find you and connect?
So I have my leadership website. So that's Catamentum, which is catalyze and momentum squished together. Catamentum, CATAMENTUM.com. LinkedIn, obviously, we're all on LinkedIn. So Rachel M. Burr, as in Marine. And then the book website is butterflygoobook.net. And
Awesome.
for the ebook, we are on pre-order and will launch on Tuesday.
Awesome. I look forward to diving into it, Rachel. Thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Dane.
Thank you for joining us. Remember that by embracing vulnerability, trusting our intuition, and approaching challenges with compassion, we not only strengthen our teams, but also pave the way for a future where collaboration thrives. If you're hungry for more insights, strategies, and research on collaboration, head over to thefutureofteamwork.com. There, you can join our mailing list to stay updated with the latest episodes and get access to exclusive content tailored to make your team thrive. Together, we can build the future of teamwork. Until next time.